Hello, this is David with 3 Orcs. Today I want to make a video about one of the first campaigns I ever ran back in the 80s, called the Temple of Elemental Evil. I'm going to talk about the actual campaign in Greyhawk. I'm going to go ahead and review some of the notes that Gygax wrote in the DM section of the module, and we can talk about what he intended for the Dungeon Master to do when he run this game, to run this module. So as you can see, I have it open right now. It's by Gary Gygax, but finished by Frank Mencher, and this is the actual mega module, the T1 through 4. I remember running the T1 module back in the early 80s, and my players took over the moat house, and we actually built a model of it. And I had the temple forces come back later with a cleric riding a wyvern, wielding a death mace, and I remember the players defending that, and that was just an epic battle. But that was before this module came out. Unfortunately, we lost that model a long time ago, so we no longer have it. So first off, I want to say that the campaign would unfold for the typical Gygaxian fashion. The players would be sent to take out a particular bandit group, which would lead to another and another, with layers of the onion leading to the temple agents and various villages and locales, leaving the players to figure out that there are powers behind the bandits, and that then powers behind those powers leading to the temple. They spiral in on the temple over time, rather than being the obvious goal from the outset of the campaign. So rather than you arrive at the seemingly peaceful village near the evil temple, it becomes more like you're rooting out some ordinary seemingly bandits to learn that there's a shadowy figure behind them. And then there's a sort of a weird cult behind him. And now it looks like the cult is tied to the temple. But there's also, their tentacles are into the government of Verbobonc, who hired you in the first place. So just who can you trust? That's the kind of campaign I'm running. It's basically a mix between the Temple of Elemental Evil from the 80s in combination with the Game of Thrones type politics, where you don't know who you can trust and who's behind what. So I don't run just the module. I run a series of adventures leading up to the module and around the module. So I find this a lot more satisfying as a full fleshed out campaign. And you turn the whole thing from 2 villages and 2 dungeons into a whole wilderness campaign with multi-layered political intrigues, bandit fighting, clearing out other temple outposts, and eventually culminating into the assault of the temple itself. So these are the points I wanted to make after reading the notes in the module. The temple does not exist in a vacuum, so there must be someone assisting the temple in Verbobonc. The temple agents recruit bandits, mercenaries, humanoids, monsters. They do this weekly. The module does state how many new recruits they get per week, so it does say you do have to think about how that's happening. They need supplies, weapons, raw materials. They need slaves for labor, sacrifices, and undead. So my thoughts on this are, to provide such a massive growth and supplies to the temple, it has to have many agents around the area, including other temple locations, outposts, like the moat house near Hamlet. There must be spies in Verbobonc, and big support for someone with a lot of clout. Maybe one of the nobles, a high-level wizard, or a rich merchant. So the quotes in the module that I'm referring to, I'll show you now. This is to show that the development is highly suggested by Gygax to run a successful, fleshed out, grand campaign. So let's go to page 5. Scroll down here. And on page 5, there's a lot of notes for the Dungeon Master. So if you're a player wanting to play in a campaign like this, I highly suggest you don't listen to this or read this. But one of the quotes on page 5 was, "But then, a year ago, the bandits began to ride the roads again. Not frequently, but to some effect. To the good folk of Hamlet, this seemed to be all too familiar. So they sent word to the Viscount that wicked forces might still lurk thereabouts. This information has been spread throughout the countryside, and the news has attracted outsiders to the village once again, Who and what these men are, no one can quite be sure. So, and that could be other adventurers, NPCs, or other agents that's referring to. But we'll continue now to page 6, where it talks about this a little bit further. Right before the chapter called Other Adventures, it says, there are wheels within wheels in the village of Hamlet, and the lands around. Behind each person lurks another, the circle growing wider, and the figures shadowy but very powerful. There again, it's a quote leading to the idea that there's other agents out there, an outpost. In the middle of the page, under Hamlet and Nulb, if you develop the later village in the manner given for the former, many natural developments will suggest themselves. So there he references again that you got to develop your own thing. New arrivals of typical townsfolk must be fairly common, and NPC adventurers will arrive with regularity. Some of the later may be interest of use, available as hirelings or mercenaries, while some will have their own ideas for adventure, and may assemble to rival the party. Then, of course, a few are what they seem and may be quite powerful. And then the last column, under Cron Hills, I wanted to point out that there's nearly 20,000 gnomes that live in that area. It mentions at the bottom that other caves and ruins aplenty lie scattered in the region. This is a natural setting for some of the other small dungeon of... This is a natural setting for some other small dungeon of your own design, which can be tailored to challenge the party's resources, and that while remaining within their capabilities. So it's another suggestion that you should maybe create another module, another dungeon, maybe to help level the players up before they get to the temple. Because that's a common problem. People always ask, after they clear out the moat house, the players might be like second level, maybe third. They're way too low level to tackle the temple, and people always ask, what can they do before going to the temple? What other module can they run? And Gygax's idea was, you have to create your own content. And then, further along, under the Velverdiva section, let's see, scroll up a little bit. The natural flow of the river is eastward, from the lower Yatil Mountains and the Catspur Range, southward through Valuna, past Verbobonc, and quite near Nulb. It's fed by the Emrides Run, and continuing through the gnarly forest to the great Nyrdive, the Lake of Unknown Depths. One of its sources is the far northern Bernal Forest in the land of Blackmoor itself, and where the water flows, creatures follow. Another reference of recruitment of the temple, because this is a perfect highway. A way for troops, monsters, recruits to get to the temple undetected down this river. And I pretty much use it. If you look at the wandering monster chart table for that area, there's a big section for pirates. And those pirates work with the temple. They have a contract, they work with them, and they regularly bring supplies and prisoners. In my campaign, I fully developed that, of course. So it states that a simple boating jaunt, either upstream or downstream, can encounter river pirates or random aquatic monsters. Then it says that low-level characters should be discouraged. That's a high-level area to some extent. But if you're level 5 and up, you can find the powers of chaos and evil lurking in the waters nearby. And who knows what things or even kingdoms lurk in the depths. Another reference to developing something of your own to put there to further expand the adventure to make it to a grand epic campaign, not just a dungeon dive. All right, so then further along, we talk about Verbobonc. So Verbobonc is the obvious source of new adventurers. I have a lot of the players, in my campaign, they start from there. And I give them all these seeds, the quests and seeds of story plots and lines with their background. They don't have to be from there, and most of the players are not from there, but that's where they all arrive looking for adventure to head off south into Verbobonc. So you really need to detail Verbobonc out, which a lot of people have over the years, and I've done that as well. So also, the spies of the Rising Temple are there also, and we'll follow those who seem to be on their mistress's trail. So if they discover that anybody's up to something, discovering the secrets of the temple or thwarting their aims of supplies and political leverage in the area, like there's problems with the gnomes lately with their mines on the South Front Range, they'll send agents after them, follow them to see what they're up to, and put a stop to them. There's little of that going to happen at first level, unless they're hired by like a noble. Maybe a noble hired them on this big epic quest. It has nothing. They don't know anything about the Temple of Elemental Evil at that point. All they know is there's bandits, there's trouble with the mines, the gnomes, the bandits in the area, things like that. And so they'll help a noble out, and that could stir up some interest. Whenever there's any nobles involved in anything, that gets a lot of attention from other nobles as well. But that's my campaign. It doesn't say anything like that in this module. So more. Okay, let's go further. So the city has 11,600. This is the year 576 Common Year. The Viscounty has a population of 35,000. Considerable design time is required for full details. There, he says it right there. You got to develop this area yourself to run a full campaign. You can't just, if you run just a dungeon dive, you do a discredit to the module. Gygax did not run it that way, but he stated elsewhere that there's not enough room in the module to put in print everything he created for the campaign. I mean, even so, the module is like almost 200 pages long. It would be 1,000 pages if he was able to put everything he did that he developed for his campaign. So it says he suggests that you develop small portions like the Palace of the Viscount Wilfric, City Hall, Mayor's Residence, Guild Halls, strongholds of the nearby gnomes and the elves, etc., etc. It may suffice for your campaign. It's up to you. It's your campaign. It's how much you want to put into it. If accompanied by a general street descriptions and broad selection of random encounters. Yeah, that way it gives the player something to do. Or quests that you develop. So, now let's go to the Ruins of the Moat House. The Ruins of the Moat House. This is on page 21. There is a section here that's of interest that talks more along the lines of how you got to develop this campaign. So, as you look down on the third paragraph, this place was once the outpost of the Temple of Elemental Evil. Its watchtower and advanced base for raids, looting, and destruction. From this area, servants of the temple were to bring the village of Hamlet and all the lands around it into subjection. The conquered folk were then to be used as slaves to construct yet another fortress further west, spreading the evil power of the temple in an ever-growing rings to encompass all the land around its base. So that also underlies the fact that there are other temples out there, other outposts out there, because they're trying to expand in rings. And I would say that they're expanding into the Crown Hills, the Gnarly Forest, towards the Valdiva River, Verbobonc, and as far south as the border of Selene, the Fairy Kingdom. I couldn't see them expanding past that. The elves would not allow that. And then to continue along on page 28, notes for the Dungeon Master. The dungeons of the Temple of Elemental Evil are extensive. It's quite likely that many long adventures would be conducted before your players have exhausted its possibilities. You will therefore become not only intimately familiar with the temple, but also come to know the village of Nolb as if it were your own. In fact, the place is only sketched so that you can, in effect, make it so. That's very true. They only supplied 4 locations in the town. Over the years, many Dungeon Masters, DMs, have recreated Nolb and posted them online. You can find maps, you can find articles that describes every house in the town itself and all the NPCs. Also outlines all the NPCs and all the NPCs' activities. In combination with this module and those, including my own, you can really flush out the area to become a full-fledged campaign with plenty to do for the party to get into trouble. So further on, it talks about constructing more proof that this is what they wanted you to do, intended for you, the Dungeon Master to do, was you can easily construct this your campaign map using graph paper, 2 sheets of paper for the west, 2 for the south, cover important territories, Hamlet being located on the high road, 2 maps west, it just goes on and on, an idea of how to map the area out. Then we talk about Nolb. Okay, further on the same page, here in the middle of this paragraph, it states that in any event there is continuing action in the village, you should prepare a map of the place, and possibly some of its main buildings. Following the examples found in Hamlet, only 4 places to Nob are dealt with herein, and you should enjoy developing the remainder. Another statement that you're expected to fully flush out and develop Nob. So further on it says, as with any adventure, be certain to read and familiarize yourself with all the material throughout to start your campaign. Adjust details to suit your own concept of fantasy. Personalize things for your group, and add things to make it work to complete the setting. Another statement that you're expected to fully flush this out into a full campaign. So we can move on to page 30, part 2, Nob and the Ruins. This page talks about the random monster encounter tables. And as you can see in the river, there's quite a big chance for merchant ships and pirate ships. So the thing I wanted to point out was the outdoor notes. A casual look at the area map reveals that in general, only terrain features are shown. Yeah, that's like that with all Greyhawk maps, actually. Only capital cities and major landmarks are shown. Not a lot of detail in the surrounding countryside, because as you know, in medieval days, there was a small village every 8 to 12 miles, because that's how far a merchant caravan would travel in one day, because they would not want to be caught out in the open in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, for bandits or monsters to come up upon them and kill and loot all their stuff. So, wilderness encounters for special sorts are not given. 2 reasons. First, the length of the material included herein precludes extensive detailing of the outdoor areas. Another statement why they didn't provide this in the module. You can't run this module as written from reading directly from the pages unless you're an amazing improv DM. And that very special skills to be able to handle that. And I've never seen a DM be able to do that well. Well, I've seen a few, but not many. Second, it's meant for a long-term campaigning. It's absolutely necessary for a DM to personalize his or her map to suit the tempo, the direction of events, and the group. So they want you to build this up, customize it for your style of game, and that's what's expected to run this module. So let's continue to part 3, Dungeons of the Elemental Evil. There's a section called Recruiting. And this is the last thing I wanted to point out, proving my points about what should be done with this module. So, recruiting. All factions of the temple are active in the crucial area. In this crucial area, agents roam near and far to bring all sorts of evil humans and humanoids into service. River pirates and brigands are a major source. Humanoids come from all quarters. So, yeah, pirates and brigands come usually by river. Like I mentioned earlier, and humanoids come from all quarters, which is mostly from the Gnarly Forest and the Lort Mill Mountains and the Quran Hills, but mostly I would believe from the Gnarly Forest, because large groups of humanoids can actually traverse the Gnarly Forest without being detected. I know that's the job of the Gnarly Rangers, to track, monitor, and to stop incursions of humanoids coming into the area, but it's such a large forest. They can't handle the entire area alone. I don't know if you know anything about the Gnarly Forest, you know that there's not that many rangers in service, and they usually patrol alone or with one apprentice, a junior ranger, and so they're not capable of stopping or handling a warband of, let's say, 500 orcs, which is an extreme example, or a warband of ogres. So all they can do is report their movements and go look for help and report. And hopefully the rest of the denizens of the Gnarly Forest will be able to handle it. Between the druids, the fae, the elves, and the rangers. And if they still can't handle all that, then they start complaining to Verbobonc or the surrounding countries for assistance. And it can get that way in this module, in this campaign, eventually, when that temple starts to really ramp up. And I do have that in play later on in the campaign. I include things that are happening from the Sus Forest up and down the Wild Coast, as far as the Pamars, because you can include the A1 through A4 modules, the slaver modules, into all this too. But I wouldn't want to send my players that way, because it diverts them from the area, and I'd rather keep my players focused on the area and deal with the politics and the nobles of the area, and it gives them an end game. Because if you play a campaign to just delve into this dungeon and loot it and kill everything with no real end sight, or maybe it's this hypothetical like I might get a castle or a bunch of followers someday, and then you just retire and okay, let's start a new game. Yeah, that's what people usually do. But if there's a real concrete, obvious end game that they see during play, then I think that adds a lot to the game. It adds a lot of weight to the game, more realism. Because if they get to know all the nobles and the people of the land and all the politics and all the towns and cities and guards and people, and they get involved with all these little mini quests and following up on all these things that are happening to track down what's going on, they get a name for themselves. And it's possible for them to be fully rewarded as heroes of the realm one day. Because that's what happened with House Osbury. I don't know, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, whatever it was. He was just an adventurer. And he married Lady Osbury or something like that. Anyway, yeah, it's possible to become somebody known. It's possible to become a noble with your own lands and your own villages and your own castle. Or a wizard's tower or your own thieves guild, whatever it is. But if you get to experience and get involved with the streets of Verbobonc or the different villages, depending on your character and race, you actually have a visual sense of what could happen to you in the future. Something positive, something great. Then you can retire knowing that it was all more real. It wasn't just hand waving. So that's why I like about doing a full grand campaign. I know it takes a few years, but I believe it's worth it. It's like a difference between playing a first-person shooter and an MMO. You know, it's fun for a couple hours until you get disgusted with it and you quit and you get upset because you just wasted 2 hours of your life. But when you play an MMO, at least you're working to something and you can keep going back and continue building your relationships and your character. And that's the kind of example I use. So, all right. So this describes my campaign and how I look at developing the Temple of Elemental Evil as written by Gary Gygax. And what is expected. I see that there's a lot of DMs out there that pretty much try to run it from the book, just like you would do almost any module, and that's definitely not recommended. So if you want to check out my Patreon, I will put up articles, PDFs of some of the locations throughout my campaign. You can use in yours if you like. I draw in a lot of information from other sources, and I'll credit them as well. And you can replace all this information that you want with. You can use some of it as placeholders for your own artwork or for your own NPCs. But I also provide maps too, so you can go ahead and check me out. If you have any requests, please post that below. If you have any comments, go ahead and post that as well, and I'll comment on that as well. Thank you so much for your time, and you have a good day and happy gaming.